Nowadays, Universal Pictures releases a lot of the independent, more eclectic films through the Focus Features label. However, before that, they had another in-house distributor for specialty films, and that was Gramercy Pictures. Gramercy was founded in 1992 as a joint venture between Universal and Polygram Filmed Entertainment, and the aim was to release small and modestly budgeted films. The first film released by this new division was the Mario Van Peebles Western Posse, which pulled in respectable numbers at the box office. One of the producers on this movie was the British production company Working Title Films, which Polygram had also acquired in 1992. Another notable early release from Gramercy was the Richard Linklater comedy Dazed and Confused, although he hated the way they marketed it. Linklater felt the film should have been advertised as the coming-of-age teen comedy it is, but Gramercy instead decided to target the stoner crowd and focus heavily on psychedelic imagery. Linklater blamed the box office performance on this marketing approach and Universal's general lack of interest in the movie, but it would eventually find a much bigger audience on video. Gramercy would finally release a sizable hit with a British comedy, Four Weddings and a Funeral. The film proved to be quite a crowd pleaser in North America, where Gramercy handled the distribution, and it would receive an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. They also released the hit Australian comedy, The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, America, in addition to Danny Boyle's first feature film, Shallow Grave. Gramercy released Bryan Singer's critically acclaimed mystery film The Usual Suspects, with the marketing heavily emphasizing the question of who Kaiser Soze is. The film pulled in solid numbers on its limited release, continued to do well on video, and eventually won 2 Oscars for Kevin Spacey's performance and Christopher McQuarrie's screenplay. Not everything released by Gramercy did well, with many of their films being largely ignored by audiences. One notable flop was the video game adaptation Double Dragon, which was dismissed by critics and reportedly only grossed $4 million worldwide. Another was Michael Moore's satirical comedy Canadian Bacon, which Gramercy gave a very small release to. So small that the film made less than $200,000. To date, it's still the only non-documentary film Moore has directed. Another film from a sophomore director that came and went from theaters largely unnoticed was Kevin Smith's Mallrats. Critics did not like the movie, and despite playing on more screens than his first movie Clerks, it somehow made less than that film. The good news is Mallrats would find its audience on video, and Smith has remarked that it's usually the first film of his that fans come across. Another box office disappointment was Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie. The people behind the cult television show about riffing movies were very excited when Universal decided to produce a theatrical film, but were then disappointed it would be released under Gramercy Pictures, which did not have as big of an advertising and release footprint as Universal. Head writer Michael J. Nelson revealed years later that Gramercy's publicity department had to choose either MST3K the movie or the Pamela Anderson vehicle Barbed Wire to promote, as they only had enough money to push one of them. In the end, Barbed Wire was chosen, and Mystery Science Theater did little business at the box office, mainly thanks to this and the small release it got. However, Barbed Wire would also flop. There did seem to be a general attitude that Gramercy was Universal's lesser division. The audio commentary for Mallrats even begins with Kevin Smith saying that the movie's theatrical run would have probably been more successful if it opened with the Universal logo. Gramercy also released the Wachowskis' debut film Bound in a select number of theaters, where it was not able to make its budget back. However, it's since grown a sizable cult following, especially after the success of The Matrix led to more people giving it a look. In between these films, Gramercy did occasionally score critical and commercial triumph. Tim Robbins' drama, Dead Man Walking, took advantage of its Oscar nominations and eventual win for Susan Sarandon to bring in an audience. They also released When We Were Kings, the Oscar-winning documentary about the Rumble in the Jungle boxing match. A big deal for Gramercy Pictures would be the Coen Brothers' Fargo. The film opened in the spring of 1996 to fantastic reviews, which led to strong word of mouth that helped at the box office, then later with its home video release. Fargo wound up receiving 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and won 2, which helped further grow its audience. In 1996, Polygram decided to buy Universal's 50% stake in Gramercy, assuming full control, although Universal would still help release some of the films. However, 2 years later, Seagram, which was then the parent company of Universal, would acquire Polygram, so that earlier deal turned out to be pretty pointless in the end. Meanwhile, the Mr. Bean movie was released under Gramercy, and that would turn into a sizable hit. Following the success of Fargo, Polygram backed the Coen Brothers' next movie, The Big Lebowski. Hard to believe now, but when it was first released, it was seen as a major come-down for the Coens, as it largely befuddled critics and audiences. However, over time, that movie would attain a massive following, and even people who did not exactly know what to make of it on the first viewing would return to it and grow a further appreciation for the strange mystery comedy the Coens put together. Gramercy also released the historical drama Elizabeth, starring Cate Blanchett as the English Queen. Widely acclaimed, especially for Blanchett's performance, the movie was nominated for Best Picture, among other awards. Now, bear with me for a few minutes, because things are about to get a little complicated. Shortly after Seagram acquired Polygram, they decided to wind down its film operations, as they were mostly interested in its music assets, and working title was then placed under Universal. Seagram would sell off the pre-March 1996 Polygram library to MGM, which is why movies like Four Weddings and a Funeral, Fargo, and The Usual Suspects are now owned by Amazon. Meanwhile, another Polygram-owned production company, Interscope Communications, October Films, an independent film distributor acquired by Universal, and Gramercy Pictures were sold to former Fox CEO Barry Diller, who merged them to create USA Films. However, Gramercy did not entirely go away, as the name still appeared on a few USA Films releases. One was Being John Malkovich, which was acclaimed by critics and jump-started Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman's film careers. Pitch Black, the first film in Vin Diesel's Riddick franchise, was also a Gramercy film, as was Neil LaBute's dark comedy Nurse Betty, starring Renee Zellweger. Nurse Betty would turn out to be the last film to use the Gramercy label, at least for a while. In 2001, Universal's new parent company Vivendi would acquire USA Films, placing Gramercy back into Universal's hands. The following year, Universal bought another indie producer, Good Machine, and merged it with USA, and their recently created specialty division, Universal Focus, to form Focus Features. Curiously, when Universal re-released some of the Gramercy films on DVD, they were placed on different distribution labels. A Focus Features banner was put on the Big Lebowski DVD, although the Gramercy logo is still present on the back. And the Mallrats DVD was rebranded under Rogue Pictures, Focus's then genre film label with no mention of Gramercy on the case. It seems like Universal just wanted to forget Gramercy Pictures was ever a thing. That is until 2015, when it was announced that the label would be revived by Focus Features as a place for horror movies and other genre films. The first new Gramercy release was Insidious Chapter 3, which became another successful entry in that horror franchise. Two other sequels, Sinister 2 and London Has Fallen, also performed well, along with the horror movie The Forest. However, the science fiction action movie Selfless, starring Ryan Reynolds and Ben Kingsley, was a flop. Gramercy would release Ratchet & Clank, a film adaptation of the video game series, which was not well received by critics and pulled in terrible numbers at the box office. After that, Gramercy just sort of quietly went away and has not been used since. Focus would just continue to release any genre films they have under their own label, and I guess they felt Gramercy was unnecessary. Despite the several ups and downs and jumping from one company to the next, Gramercy Pictures still put out its own share of noteworthy films, a good number of which still retain cult status. See you next time.